So there you are. I wish at the beginning, when I had started out and said if anyone disagreed with taking the 5 precepts, someone would raise their hands. It would be really cool, right? Someone actually protesting, going against the grain and the stream. Why should I take these 5 precepts? And that's kind of, sometimes that is required in the Dhamma to kind of stand your ground and go in a different direction. I gave a talk last night at the BF Center, and that was in part about how the Buddha was a revolutionary who went different ways, always asked questions, always thinking about things in a radical way, going against the norms of society sometimes, being polite, of course, being kind, but not accepting things simply because it was part of the existing tradition. And that is kind of how we have to be sometimes as Buddhists. We have to be a bit independent, inquire a little bit, trying to understand things in a new way, because we know that there are problems, there are delusions, there are misunderstandings, and the only way to overcome that is to inquire deeply into things. I don't know if you noticed at the very end there, did you see the chanting? It says Silena Sugatinyanti. It says Silena Bhoga Sampada. Did you notice I didn't say that? Yeah, I said Silena Samadhi Sampada, right? Because Bhoga Sampada, you are all here because you are committed Buddhists. At least some of you are. I don't know if all of you are really committed. Yeah, some of you might be Vesak Buddhist. Any Vesak Buddhist here? You don't have to raise your hand. I'm just messing around. So, but the point is that Bhoga Sampada means that you practice virtue to acquire Bhoga. Bhoga means like possessions of wealth. Yeah, and it's okay. It's okay to desire to be well off and these kind of things, but it's also not really what we are here about. And so this was something that my good friend Bhante Sujato told me once. Actually, take away Bhoga, put in Samadhi instead. Yeah, we are here to practice meditation, not just to acquire wealth. Most of us are here, are plenty well enough off, and if you are not well enough off, come up afterwards and we will help you out and kind of boost you a little bit, yeah, but in a special way. Let's see what happens. But the real wealth is the wealth of the heart. The real wealth is the wealth of the mind. The things that really breed and give rise to contentment and happiness comes from within, not from without. And the place to learn about these things is from the Buddha himself. That's why we start off by the homage to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and especially the Buddha, because that is the profundity of his teachings, is the wealth that all of us want to take with us. And this is what we should be focusing on, especially today, because this is the Vesak Day. We are celebrating the Buddha in a sense today. Yeah, his birth, his enlightenment, and also very interestingly, his passing away. Buddhism is only one of the few places where you celebrate death. Isn't that kind of cool? You celebrate death, right? It's kind of very interesting. It's very different from how we normally think about the world. But that is what we're going to do in part today. And I'll explain to you why that can be the case, why we can actually celebrate death. But I want to start somewhere else. I want to start by talking about how we can relate to the Buddha. Because when we talk about the Buddha, we want to understand how we can relate to him as a person. If I told you that the Buddha was right here in Singapore, he was in the MacRitchie Reserve. I don't know which direction that is, somewhere. I've completely lost my sense of direction. It's somewhere around here, not so far away. You can easily walk from the Buddhist Fellowship to the MacRitchie Reserve if you want to. In fact, we did this with your President Pang Hong last year. We walked pretty much all the way up there. And if I told you that the Buddha is sitting at the root of a tree in the MacRitchie Reserve, into the bush a little bit, kind of hidden away, how would you feel about that? Would you feel, yay, the Buddha is here, yeah, let's go and see him? Or would you think, oh, well, that's a bit scary, should I go and see the Buddha? Who is this Buddha anyway? Would you feel like going there and visiting straight away? Would that be kind of your inclination of the mind? Or would you feel a bit kind of reserved and a bit scared, a bit concerned about visiting someone with such a massive reputation? is a hard one, right? And one of the problems, I think, is that actually we feel quite distant from the Buddha. The Buddha existed 2,500 years ago. He existed in an Indian culture that was quite different from almost all cultures in the present day. When we hear the stories of the Buddha, the mythology, the legends, they're always very hard to the kind of extraordinary. He was this being who could fly through the air, he could read your mind, all of these kind of things. So all of these things, they create a distance between us and the Buddha. Cultural distance, time distance, distance in terms of what is acceptable or common human ways of behaving. He's kind of very different. The mythology, the legend, all of these things create a gap between us and the Buddha. It's hard to imagine the Buddha being here in Singapore and then being able to go and visit him, maybe bow down, ask him a few questions, like, oh yeah, I got a problem with my husband and wife, what should I do? Is that what you would ask the Buddha? No. But that's what they do in the suttas. They go to the Buddha and they ask these kind of questions, like King Pasenadi is coming and huffing and puffing, and he says, "Oh no, my wife gave birth to a girl." That was really bad news in India. You're not supposed to give birth to a girl. You're supposed to get a son instead. And then the Buddha gives a beautiful verse on how actually girls can be perfectly good, sometimes better than sons, depending on the quality of the son. And that's kind of nice. So the Buddha actually dealt with very ordinary things. I often tell the story as well in the suttas when the Buddha gave King Pasenadi, he gave him advice on how to lose weight. You know that? Isn't that amazing that Buddha he really looks after you in so many ways. The Buddha is not just some magical being who flies through the airs and zaps you and kind of makes you feel enlightened or whatever. That's not what the Buddha is. The Buddha is an ordinary human being. He's down to earth. If you have ordinary problems like relationship problems, you don't know how can I get my kids to listen to the Dhamma? This is the kind of question I get all the time. How do I get my kids to listen? I'm like, I don't know. I don't have any kids. I've got a clue how you do that. Sounds impossible to me, It's hard enough to get the monks to listen to the Dhamma, let alone your kids. And so Buddha is actually very down to earth. He approaches the people in a very ordinary way. He not only does he look after you spiritually, but he looks after you in whatever way you really need. Because by looking after you in ordinary ways, he kind of shows his compassion and understanding for the human condition. The Buddha is a human being. He understands these things. We need to go beyond the legends and the mythology. We need to go beyond all the seemingly magical stuff. We need to go beyond the distance in time and the distance in culture and try to see the Buddha, the human being that is behind the scenes. Draw back the veil, draw back the curtain and see the real Buddha as he actually was. That is what we need to do. And this can be quite hard, but this is kind of what I want to try to do today. Find out who the real Buddha was, how to approach that idea in a way that makes us closer so that next time you read the suttas, okay, maybe that's an exaggeration. Next time some of you read the suttas, probably some of you have never read any suttas, right? Let's face it, that's usually the way it is. But remember, the suttas are just a Dhamma talk. They are a Dhamma talk not by someone like me or any other monk or nun or a lay person, just an ordinary person, nothing really special. It's the Dhamma talk by the Buddha. So when you listen to the Buddha, you're hearing a Dhamma talk by the greatest spiritual master in human history. Now that is awesome, that is inspiring, that is special. And the only reason why you don't listen to them is because you feel a distance to the Buddha. If you really understood what was going on, you would read those suttas with reverence. You would kind of shake while you were reading. Oh, it's the word of the Buddha. Oh, okay, read carefully. Slowly, slow down. Okay, one word at a time. What is it really trying to say? Wow, this is so exciting. That's how you would feel if you really understood what is going on. But that is not usually how most people read the suttas. And so we need to find that humanity of the Buddha. that feeling that the Buddha is your teacher. In fact, the Buddha is a far more important teacher than any other teacher in the whole world, because Buddha gives you access to the most profound meaning, the profound reality, the profound happiness, the elimination of suffering that any human being can do. And for that reason, he is worthy of being listened to more than anyone else. I was telling the other day, I was just saying that, you go to primary school and your primary school teacher says that 1 + 1 is 2, and you say, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, right? Is that what you say here in Singapore? Yeah, okay. But that might still be wrong. But the Buddha, is even more important than that. So even though the primary school teacher says 1 + 1 is 2, you say yes, and you agree with it, you should agree with the Buddha even more than that. You might reject 1 + 1 is 2, but you would not reject the awakening of the Buddha. That's how important it is. And yet that is not how we think about things. We think, the Buddha taught rebirth. Not so sure. Okay, whatever. But 1 + 1 is 2. Absolutely, 1 + 1 is 2. No other way around. 1 + 1 is 2. Maybe not. The Buddha, there's rebirth. Yes, of course, that is absolutely true. That is the way you should be thinking here. Am I making any sense to anyone? Okay, I hope so, because I'm afraid that what I'm saying is kind of really so weird that people kind of don't take me seriously after a while. But I mean this in a very serious way, actually, and you'll be surprised that it's possible to be serious about such things, but it is possible. And even though I may say it a little bit lightly, not to be too heavy about it, it's also a very serious matter. So this is what we want to do. So how can we do this? So now I want to relate this to the life story of the Buddha, the birth, the awakening, and the passing away. But before I do that, I got coffee here, just sitting here. That's not a good idea, It shouldn't just be sitting there. It should be used by somebody. So I'm going to use this coffee. So give me just a few seconds just to organize myself over here. I feel a bit bad about this because you might get jealous when you see me drinking coffee on the stage. So I'm being very naughty. So I'm going to give a commentary as I do this. So taking the lid off, ding, lid off. And then we have the milk over here. See this? It's pretty good, isn't it? Really good service around here in Singapore. People are very kind. Wow. So I'm going to have to put down the microphone a little bit. Are you going to do it for me? Okay. That means I can... wow. Incredibly good service. I'm really impressed. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Just go for the whole thing. Yeah. Great. Wonderful. That is very, very generous. It's nice to come running up on the stage and helping me out. Wow. That is so nice. Okay. I'm going to test it. I'm going to tell you if it's any good. It's nice. It does its job. It gives a bit of an extra boost. So that's great. So we want to start at the beginning here. The birth of the Buddha. And we know that the Buddha was born in a place in Nepal called Lumbini. And you can go there in the present day, and it's still quite a nice place to go. If you haven't been to India, I recommend you to go at least once in a lifetime. India is a wonderful place. It's a magical country. It is so different from most of the rest of the world. It's like a very special culture in India. It's very spiritual. It has this ancient feeling of spirituality about it. And I must admit, I love traveling around the world to most places. I love meeting people because people everywhere, they are good people with good hearts. And as a Buddhist monk, you get to meet the best people in the world. But India has a special place because it is the birthplace of the Buddha. Actually Nepal, but Nepal is really part of Greater India, if you wish. In those days, there was no distinction in countries. And so when we celebrate the birth of the Buddha, actually, first of all, it was not the Buddha, it's the birth of the Buddha to be. Some people say the Bodhisattva or Bodhisatta, but I prefer just the Buddha to be, because Bodhisattva is a loaded term. And so what are we actually celebrating when we're celebrating the birth of the Buddha to be? What is really going on? And many people would think that what we are celebrating is like this bodhisattva is being reborn. He has been practicing for 4 incalculable eons. After taking the vow under the Buddha Dipankara, he was the ascetic Sumedha. I will be the future Buddha Gautama 4 incalculable eons from now. But that is mythology. That has no basis in history. The Buddha himself does not say this. This is said by later generations trying to understand who the Buddha was. And if the Buddha doesn't say this, then it cannot be that important, right? Whether it is true or not, I cannot tell you because I don't know obviously what happened in the Buddha's past lives. But what I can tell you is that if the Buddha himself didn't say it, it cannot really have any significance as far as the Dhamma is taught. So that is not really why we celebrate the birth of the Buddha, because of this vast mythology and legend going into the unfathomable past, which is 4 incalculable eons or whatever it is. So what are we celebrating then with the birth of the Buddha? And what we are celebrating is the starting point of an amazing career. A career where someone had, obviously the Buddha had some special qualities, otherwise he wouldn't be able to reach the awakening. So he came into this world and he had some special qualities. So where did those qualities come from? And those qualities just came through the way the world works. If you look at a large crowd like we have here today, some of you will have some qualities, other people will have other qualities. Some of you will be good meditators, some of you will fall asleep in your meditation. Is that true? It's true for me. I fall asleep sometimes. So this is the way it is, right? And why is that? Why is it that people have different characters? Well, the reason is because the conditioning in the past is different. That is the only reason why the Buddha had a special character when he was reborn, because of the conditioning from the past. And so what we are really celebrating when we're talking about the birth of the Buddha, we're celebrating the beginning of an amazing career, an amazing start point, someone who we know will be able to find that way through the darkness. Even for the Buddha, it was quite difficult. Sometimes he went too far to the left, he had to go to the right, went too far to the right, and he had to kind of find his way through, making many mistakes on the way. Remember that. The Buddha made many mistakes. He didn't know what he was doing. He was blind when he set out on this path, and he had to find his way through this. For us, it is, surprisingly as it may seem, for us it is relatively easy, because we are given the path on the plate. The Buddha found it without having the path. I mean, how many arahants here today? Not so many, right? And this shows you that actually, even if you're given the path on the plate, it is still quite hard. The Buddha found his way without being given the path from anyone. And that is truly extraordinary. And that is what we are celebrating. This person who was able to find his way through the darkness without having a teacher. And that is what is so amazing here. So what made that possible? Well, one reason was because the Buddha, as I just mentioned already, he had many good qualities. Through circumstances and conditions, he was born with those qualities. Secondly, because of the Indian culture, a culture that was very inquisitive. It inquired into the meaning of life. It inquired into the understanding of suffering and happiness. This was a natural part of that culture. Very kind of spiritually inclined. It was a culture that supported people to go forth, to practice the ascetic life. It was a culture where the spiritual path was already practiced in a very profound way. If you look at some of the ancient people at the time of the Buddha, they were already practicing samadhi. And so they were very close to what we consider the goal of Buddhism. They weren't quite there, but they were very close. And all of these factors coming together is what makes the Buddha's birth so significant, because those factors coming together allows a person to find the way through the darkness and find the solution to the problems of life. That is what we're celebrating when we're looking at the birth of the Buddha. Yeah, this being coming into the world. So just to get that clear, again, get the mythology out of the way. Come back to what really matters, seeing the Buddha for what it is. He was an ordinary human being born into this world, but he had some qualities that most people don't have. Then, as the Buddha was living his young life, he grew up in a very wealthy household. We know that from the suttas. He was not really a prince. He wasn't super wealthy. Some of the exaggerations you find in later text. He was, by modern standards, not even super duper wealthy. By modern standards, we often have much, much more than they had in those days. It was quite simple. The wealth they had would be nice food, some good cloth for their clothes, and these kind of things, but nothing too fancy. And so then, as he was living his life, he was a very inquisitive, an inquiring young man, the Buddha to be. And he looked at life, and it wasn't very hard for him to see that there were some problems with life. It wasn't just all kind of, champagne and happiness all the time. Actually, I'm not sure champagne is kind of the wrong word, but you know what I mean. It wasn't just kind of all, great and wonderful. There were some downsides with life. He was observant. He saw what was going on. But the things that he focused on were very simple things. They were the simple, ordinary things that most people also somehow see, but don't really contemplate deeply enough. And those problems are the problems of death, primarily. This is kind of one of the main things that the Buddha to be was focusing on. Old age, illness, death, corruptions of the mind, the sorrow and lamentations of life. This was what he saw in the world around him. This is what is focused on. And this contemplation on these things, plus another contemplation I will talk about in a minute, were the things that made the Buddha seek for a way out. Isn't that extraordinary? These are such simple things. Usually when I ask most people, I ask them, aren't you aware that you're going to die? And they will say, yes, I'm aware. But why then aren't you the Buddha? Why aren't you a monk or a nun? If you are aware, but are you really aware? And then start thinking, maybe you have a point. Maybe I'm kind of superficially aware, but not deeply aware. And that is one of the problems here. The Buddha is someone who understands the problem of death, the problem of the reality of existence in such a deep way that he motivates him to let go of his entire privileged upbringing, leave all of that behind and seek for a deeper answer, because he understands that the privilege of a good life is worth nothing if life has these drawbacks that it has. You may have a very privileged life. You may have a good education. You may be well off. But all of that is going to go when you die. You cannot hold on to any of that. So how valuable is it really? It is valuable for a short time. But then it becomes a burden when you die, because then you are attached to these things. You can't let go. And that dying process, when you are attached and can't let go, is a painful process. And so this is how the Buddha contemplates. This is how he thinks about existence. But of course, the Buddha adds another layer to it. And that other layer is the idea of rebirth. And the problem of death, the problem of sorrow, the problem of the realities of existence only really become problematic when there is a rebirth. Because then the reality is we have to go through these things again and again and again. It is no longer just rebirth. It is re-death. It is re-old age. It is re-illness. It is re-sorrow, re-lamentation, again and again and again. And in that context, it is very, very problematic. And that is what the Buddha saw. And so the idea of rebirth is fundamentally baked into the Buddha's teachings. That was part of the thing that drove the Buddha to become an ascetic and practice for a liberation from these things. It's kind of extraordinary in a way. You remember, the Buddha is an ordinary person, right? Thinking about the ordinary things of life, just like we also sometimes think about them. And then based on that reflection, he decides to leave it all behind and just walks off, disappears into the McRitchie Reserve. Okay, not the McRitchie Reserve, but you know what I mean, right? Disappears into the forest somewhere, yeah? Far away, walks off. I'm going to find a solution to the most fundamental problems of life. That is the greatness of the Buddha. The greatness of the Buddha is not all the other stuff. It is this incredible audacity, the confidence in his own abilities to actually do this. That is the amazing thing about the Buddha. He says in one of the suttas, a very interesting little line, he says that if there was any being who was born with non-delusion, it is about me that can be said. He had this incredible clarity of purpose, clarity about the nature of existence that enabled him to do something that the vast majority of humanity can never do. That is the amazing thing of the Buddha. He's an ordinary person. He could sit here right with us. You probably barely notice the Buddha because the Buddha is not a big ego. The Buddha is not someone who wants to kind of have the attention on him. Yeah, that is very different from me. I'm sitting here, have all the attention on me. That's kind of bad. The Buddha probably wouldn't want that at all. He'd probably go over in the corner there somewhere and, find his way out of here as quickly as possible. He doesn't want to see anyone. He wants to meditate. He wants to go to a cave. He wants to be by himself. Why? Because he just wants to chillax. Yeah. Everyone wants to chillax. The Buddha is the same. And so this is it's so natural, it is so ordinary, and yet at the same time also very profound and very amazing what he's doing. What he's amazing is amazing from an ordinary person's point of view, that an ordinary person can actually take it to that extent. That is what is remarkable. But there was one other thing that also motivated the Buddha to go forth. And that one other thing is not compassion. Yeah, very often you hear that the Buddha was motivated by compassion for humanity, but actually there is no evidence for that in the suttas because he didn't know that there was a solution. He didn't know that there was a way out of the problems of existence. It was too early to have compassion before you knew whether there was an answer. First you find the answer, then you allow the compassion to drive you and then to go forth to explain the teachings afterwards. So you have to do this in the right sequence. No, the other thing that drove the Buddha to renounce this ordinary life was the fact of the nature of the world. The Buddha looked into the world, and what he saw when he looked into the world was that there was conflict everywhere. People settle down somewhere. Some of the time they're just moving around, but sometimes they settle down. And even when they settle down, wherever that might be, even in a peaceful country like Singapore, there is conflict, right? There's conflict between people. There's conflict maybe sometimes between groups or whatever. There are always difficulties that need to be sorted out because this is the nature of human existence. It's very hard for us to live in absolute harmony. And the reason why that is hard is because of the sense of self, because of our desires, because of our aversions. These things naturally lead to a sense of conflict. And the Buddha, to be, this great spiritual master in human existence, he looks at that and he says that I felt fear when I saw the conflict in human society because there was nowhere to go that was free of that conflict. This is 2,500 years ago, and it is just as true today. In fact, maybe more true today. When I look out at the world, when I read the news about what is happening, when I see the wars everywhere, when I see the saber rattling, the big nations starting to look at, they don't like each other anymore, they don't want to cooperate, it's all about geopolitics and who can be the most powerful. It's kind of concerning. We just don't know what's going to happen next. You live in the middle of peace, you live in the middle of prosperity here in Singapore, and it has been very peaceful here since the Second World War, but things can change very quickly here, and we tend to be complacent. We think that the present situation is always going to last. This is one of the illusions of humanity or human beings, that the present will last. This is the illusion of permanence. We don't take the idea of impermanence seriously enough. Things can change so rapidly here. I live down in Australia, in Perth. Perth is like at the end of the world pretty much. You can't, the nearest city to Perth is like Adelaide, 3,000 kilometers away. That's kind of the nearest city. We live in the middle of nowhere. It's very easy to think that you are safe, right? Actually, I don't believe that for a second. Safety is never guaranteed. And this is what the Buddha saw. The uncertainty, the problems, the unreliability, how human society is through and through conflict. And the root causes of that conflict are such that it is impossible to eliminate conflict from that society. The root causes, the sense of self, the desires, these things, they are baked into the human mind. And unless you are enlightened, you're going to have them. And therefore, there will always be conflict. It's a very powerful understanding. And when you see that, you realize there's only one way out. And you have to find a solution to this problem in a very profound way. This is what the Buddha to be does. That is when he decides to go forth. It is not out of compassion for humanity. It is a rational observation of society and life. Understanding that if I just carry on with an ordinary life, I'm going to just keep on suffering endlessly. Is there a way out? That is what he's doing. Pragmatic, rational, sensible. That's where he's coming from. Actually, so what happens then? And this is the other place where we come to a very important distinction between the legend of the Buddha and the reality of the Buddha. The legend of the Buddha is that then he decides to go forth, and in the middle of the night, while his wife and his son are sleeping, he sneaks out of the palace, gets onto the back of Kantaka, the horse, rides out of Kapilavatthu, the big city of the Sakyans, jumps over the wall with his horse. It sounds like some kind of Hollywood movie, right? Jumps over the wall, rides into the darkness, and shaves off his hair and beard and walks off into the jungle. It sounds too good to be true. The reality just isn't like that. That is not what happened. What happened, and this is where the legend and reality can be distinguished quite easily, because what happens again is what you find in the suttas. And according to the suttas, the Buddha went to his parents and he said to them, I want to go forth. His parents cried. His parents did not want him to go forth. Does this sound familiar? This is true everywhere, right? I always talk to people here in Singapore or in Malaysia, and no, we will not allow our child to go forth. Yeah, absolutely not. I go to Sri Lanka, exactly the same thing. Yeah, no, okay, we have this son and daughter, they are really smart. This one will be a doctor, this one will be a lawyer. The third one, a bit of a dum-dum, okay, they can go forth. Yeah, that's usually the way it goes. That's kind of how it is, yeah. But actually, that's completely the wrong way of thinking about it. It should be the other way around. Yeah, the really smart one, they should really go forth. And the dum-dum, okay, they can do whatever. That's kind of fine. Everyone can go forth, basically. That's my point. We shouldn't discriminate like that. But the Buddha, me too. It was actually very hard for me to go forth. You won't believe this. My parents were not happy at all. It's not as if because I'm born in a Western country, your parents are really happy to let go of you. Not at all. Yeah, I was just talking to your president, VF President Pang Hong, the other day, how all human culture are so similar. We tend to rejoice in the differences because that makes life more interesting. We're saying, oh, this culture is like that, that culture is like this. But actually, underlying it, basically, we are all the same. Very boring thing to say, but that's the basic truth. And so when I decided to become a monk, my parents were really unhappy. I got a letter from my mother, oh, no, this is terrible. We want to see you. We don't want you to disappear into into a cult or whatever they thought that Buddhism was. They had no idea about Buddhism at all. They were completely clueless. And so it is always the same. And we see the same also with the Buddha to be here. Even though you have this son who was extraordinary in so many ways, and obviously would be a great leader in the spiritual practice, his parents do not want it. They wished otherwise. And that is the reality. And it's a very reality we all can relate to. Yeah? Most parents here, I'm sure that if your daughter or son decided to go forth, it would be difficult, right? You may say yes, you may agree to it, because most of you here are wise enough to understand it's a good thing to become a monk or a nun. But it still would be difficult in the heart. It would be painful because your child is so close to you. And so there is that push and pull. You don't really know. On the one hand, you don't want. On the other hand, you want. And it's just the question of which one wins out in the end. So very natural thing that we see of the Buddha to be. Not some highfalutin legend where he disappears in the middle of the night. No, the reality of human existence, the complexities of human existence, the grief of human existence when these things happen. Of course, in the end, it all comes good. It comes good because the Buddha then comes back to his family. His son becomes a monk, his ex-wife becomes a nun, and they all practice, and his foster mother becomes Mahapajapati Gautami, and she becomes an arahant. And so, of course, the story has a very beautiful ending. However, there's a lot of grief and trouble on the way, what we would expect. And so the Buddha was responsible. He would have talked to his parents. He would have told them, is the family able to look after my wife and my child? Not just kind of disappearing in the middle of night. That seems irresponsible. But the Buddha, if anything, was not irresponsible. He was an incredibly responsible person. So of course, that story doesn't make any sense. This we're seeing now makes far more sense. So in the same way, we should also be responsible in our lives. We should not think that irresponsibility is the right way because there is a legend of the Buddha that seems to be irresponsible. So then the Buddha goes forth. And after going forth, he then, what does he do? Well, the first thing that he does, and this is kind of really interesting, is that he seeks out the teachers of the time. And so some of the most famous teachers of the time, they are called Alara Kalama and Uddaka Ramaputta. And you will see these two teachers in the suttas in many different places. And these were very profound meditators. These had very, very deep meditation. And the Buddha would want to be the student of the best spiritual masters of the day. Why? Why doesn't Buddha just go into the jungle and do his own thing? And the reason is because he is smart. Learn from the best before you decide whether you go off on your own or not. Don't have too much of an ego. Don't think, I am superior, I will do whatever I like. Be humble. The Buddha was humble. One of these remarkable passages in the suttas, which I always found I didn't really know what to make of it, is the passage where the Buddha, after his awakening, he says, what can I respect in the world? Now that I've reached awakening. Because someone who has nothing to respect lives in suffering. The Buddha says, in a sense, that he will live in suffering unless he has something to respect. That's kind of extraordinary. And so what the Buddha then says, well, there is no one in the world who has greater insight than I have, so there's no one in the world that I can respect. But what I can respect is the Dhamma that I have discovered. So let me live respecting that Dhamma. Isn't that kind of amazing? This is the Buddha, right? The Buddha we place on such a pedestal for very good reasons. We should do that. We just have to know the right kind of pedestal. The pedestal of human being perfected, not the God pedestal or some other dodgy pedestal, but the right kind of pedestal. Have to label the pedestal right. That's kind of the trick here. And so, so this is what the Buddha has a sense of humility about him. And that humility is what allows us to open our minds and open our hearts to an alternative way of seeing reality. If we are too full of ourselves, if our ego is too large, it is very difficult to move on, to change our views, to think about things in a new way, because we think we know already. We are already so sure of ourselves. That humility means having an open mind. That's really what it means. Humility does not mean that you allow other people to walk all over you. Humility does not mean that you have no confidence in yourself. Humility does not mean that you have no assertiveness sometimes. Humility means an openness of the mind, understanding the limits of your own knowledge, having insight into your own character, understanding who you are, what are your deficiencies and what are your strengths. That is the real humility. It means you listen. It means you're open, and then you can grow. If you have no humility, growth becomes impossible because you are already full inside, as the old Zen saying goes. Yeah, you have to empty out the cup before you can fill it with more water or coffee, maybe, as the case may be. Yeah, so this is the idea of humility. Humility and respect go together. If you are a humble person, you can be a respectful person. Yeah, these are two sides of the same coin. And when you are respectful, when you bow down to the Buddha, that very action of bowing down to the Buddha means growth in the qualities that the Buddha represents. Because that's what the Buddha is. The Buddha is those qualities. That's who he is. He is enlightenment. He is wisdom. He is compassion. That's what you're bowing down to. If you respect that, you will grow in those qualities, almost by definition. And so the Buddha has humility. He goes to these great teachers of the time. He studies under them, achieves the same kind of meditations that they had. And then, when he understands the limits of those meditations, that they don't take him to the goal of ending all suffering, of ending death and all of these kind of things that he wants to find a solution to, only then does he reject those things and then move on to the next stage of his spiritual pursuit. Yeah, this is the wise way of doing things, one stage at a time. Then, what happens to the Buddha after that is that he starts his ascetic practices. Yeah, this is where he kind of goes a little bit wrong, the wrong view. But remember that at that time, this was one of the great ways of practicing the spiritual path in those days. You did very severe ascetic practices. And so he did that because, again, he wanted to test out the existing spiritual traditions as far as possible. And so that's what he did. And he almost died. He took it all the way to the limit. I was just mentioning yesterday, according to one sutta, it says that when he touched his belly, he could feel his backbone. Yeah, I'm getting further and further away from my backbone. Especially after being fed very nice food here in Singapore. But anyway, he was kind of touching. And so he took it all to an extreme where he was on the verge of dying because he had to practice the spiritual paths as far as possible before he could see that actually they didn't work. And so then he gave up that as well, testing things, going wrong as he was testing things. Remember, he didn't have the right view yet. He didn't know what he was doing. He was experimenting, trying to find the right way forward. And at this point, when he gave up these ascetic practices, his last friends left him. The 5 friends that were the Buddha's companions all along that supported him, he lost his last friends. Now he didn't have anyone. He was by himself. All his spiritual practices had failed. He had tried the deep samadhi. He had tried the ascetic practices. Now he lost all his friends. That's pretty lonely. Nothing is working. You have no more friends. Does that mean you give up? Of course not, because you have qualities that are extraordinary. The Buddha has these special qualities. And so then he sits down. He finds a beautiful place next to the river Niranjana, and you can go there to India in the present day. The river is still there. There's a village nearby for alms. There's a beautiful stretch of ground, like in a little grove nearby. And all of these things signify the middle path, right? You've now found the middle way. It's secluded in the forest, but it's also beautiful at the same time and convenient. The Buddha is moving, the Buddha to be is moving towards the middle way. Then he sits down and he reflects on this predicament and he asks himself, could there be another way to awakening here? And that is when he recalls his experiences as a child, when he entered some deep samadhi. And by remembering that experience, he realizes that is the way to awakening. Why is that? Because it has nothing to do with the pleasure of sensual pleasures. This has to do with the pleasure of the mind, the pleasures of the spiritual path. And there's nothing wrong with those kind of pleasures. It is not about, Buddhism is not a teaching where we reject all pleasures. On the contrary, Buddhism is a teaching of the right kind of pleasure. And if you have the right kind of pleasure, you're on the path. If you have the wrong kind of pleasure, that is when you have a problem. And so the Buddha makes this incredibly important distinction between one kind of pleasure and another kind of pleasure. And this then gradually leads up to the Buddha's fundamental understanding of happiness and suffering in the world, how to find real, lasting happiness. And so he meditates like this, according to these jhanas, the deep states of meditation. And then when he does that, his next thing is then to understand the nature of existence. And understanding the nature of existence for the Buddha to be means remembering his past lives. Are there really past lives? If so, what are they like? How many are there? What kind of past lives are there? And by remembering his past lives, he understands the truth of dukkha. The truth of dukkha, of suffering, is the first noble truth. And by understanding that, you can see now how his entire insight into existence is starting to take shape, and how this later on becomes the kernel for the understanding of the Four Noble Truths. Then he understands the laws of karma, the forces that drive the round of rebirth, how this whole thing functions. And when you understand that, and you understand why this is fundamentally problematic, because it is out of control, that is when some of that power that existed there 2,500 years ago. It's a bit difficult now because it's very noisy, but still, some of that power still remains, despite all the noise and all the activities that are going on there. So that is the awakening of the Buddha. He had discovered, what had he actually discovered? And what the Buddha discovered was about happiness and suffering. What the Buddha understood was what really is happiness and what is suffering in this world. This is so important because if you look inside of yourself, you understand this is what every one of us wants. We are driven by craving. What makes you get up in the morning, what makes you do all the things that you do, going to school, going to work, eating this, eating that, coming here, being a Buddhist, everything we do is driven by this desire to find meaning and purpose and to overcome the problems of life and finding happiness. This is what drives us, and yet usually we don't really find it. And then when we die, we are still confused about these things. But the Buddha found that answer, the answer that all of us, every single human being, non-human beings as well, the animals, everyone is driven towards these things. And because he found that answer, he found the answer to the meaning of life itself. And that is just extraordinary. If someone has found the answer to the meaning of life, can we reject it? Can we say, I'm not interested in that? That's kind of crazy, right? How can you not be interested in the meaning of life? Because that is why we are here. So of course we need to be interested. And what we need, if you want to make people understand the importance of the Dhamma and Buddhism, is basically to show them that the Dhamma is about the meaning of life. This is about reality. This is the how the world works. This is how you find fundamental happiness and contentment and meaning and purpose and reality in your existence. Nothing is more important than that. Everything else is secondary. Once you get that, guaranteed you will commit to the Dhamma and Buddhism. This is what it is about. So please, if you are going to be little salesmen and saleswomen of Buddhism, this is the sales pitch, yeah? This is the way. It's the meaning of life. This is the purpose of existence. And if you can convince people of that, guaranteed you will convince them that the Dhamma is the way to go. Yeah, so be gentle with people. But if if that's what you kind of, is your goal in life to convince other people about the importance of the Dhamma? Actually, first of all, you need to convince yourself, and then you can convince others. But you know what I mean? This is really the path forward. And because I have always wondered, why is it that people, not everyone is a Buddhist? Because I am convinced that the Dhamma has precisely the answer to the meaning of life. And if that is true, shouldn't everyone be a Buddhist? How come there are many people in the world who are not? And I think basically it is because we have not been good enough at explaining what the Dhamma is about. At root, it is a marketing problem. So that is the beautiful discovery of the Buddha. And so then we come to the last of the three things that we are... when should I stop the talk, by the way, Pang Hong? Is everybody here? 11, okay. Should we have a bit of Q&A as well, maybe? Yeah, okay, good. Okay, up to me, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
We do have time, so hard stop at 11:15, so there's still about 35 minutes.
Okay, great. Okay, good. Thank you. That's good, because I can't leave out the parinibbana, right? That's really important. So we have to come to the last part as well. So that is the Buddha's discovery. Then, having discovered that, then he carries on and he practices and he lives and he teaches for 45 years. Yeah? And all he does at that time is to help people understand his discovery. Because if you have understood the meaning of life and you see that people in the world are oppressed by suffering and problems, you want to share with them. I have found the answer for you. Listen. This is for your own benefit. I'm doing this purely out of compassion for you. Actually, I don't really want to teach you at all because I know it's a nuisance to teach you, but I will teach you anyway because of compassion. This is kind of what it is like for the Buddha. Yeah, because teaching is hard. You'd rather, if you are the Buddha, you'd rather stay in the cave and just meditate. That's the reality. And so he teaches for 45 years. And then after 45 years of teaching, he comes towards the very end of his life. And that last journey of the Buddha, when he travels from Rajagaha all the way to where he eventually passes away in Kushinara, is told in the famous Mahaparinibbana Sutta in the long discourses of the Buddha. Beautiful story, one of my favorite suttas in the entire Pali Canon, because it's so rich. It has so many beautiful little details in it that are really worthwhile contemplating. And towards the end of his life, the Buddha gets sick. Yeah, the Buddha is human. Human bodies are fraught. They are fragile. Everyone gets sick. The Buddha, too, gets sick. The Buddha, in the middle of giving a talk, he says to Venerable Ananda, he says, Ananda, my back is hurting. I need to stretch. The Buddha's back is hurting. Yeah, he is an ordinary human being with the frailties of old age. And then he asks Venerable Ananda to take over the talk. On another occasion, Venerable Ananda looks at the Buddha and he says, you know, what happened to your bright and colorful skin? Yeah, you have kind of faded so much. And then the Buddha says, well, that's the way it is. When you get old, the shine of your complexion kind of gets worse and worse. You get wrinkles, you get a bit crooked, yeah, you kind of get a bit bent over. And all of these things happen to the Buddha as well. If you were to see the Buddha towards the end of your life, you would recognize an old person. The Buddha is a human being. He is like everyone else. The physical body must decline. And then the whole Sangha and all the lay people as well start to get concerned. Yeah, you can imagine the concern when this extraordinary spiritual master is starting to fade away. They get concerned. Some of them cry, some of them are overcome by sorrow and lamentation and all of these kind of things. And they wonder what is going to happen. And then the Buddha gives this beautiful teaching on how to be a refuge and being island unto yourself. You have to be the island. The Dhamma has to be your island. You have to be your own refuge. The Dhamma has to be your refuge. That is what the Buddha teaches. How do you do that? Well, basically by practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, but especially through meditation practice, by going within, finding meaning inside, stillness, peace, joy, a joy that is independent of worldly phenomena. And because it is independent of worldly phenomena, it is a refuge, it's a place of safety where the world cannot touch you in the same way that it normally does. And then, after giving this teaching, the Buddha carries on all the way to Kushinara. On the way to Kushinara, he crosses a river called the Hiranyavati River, which means like the Golden River. Now this is a little bit of a side story. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes telling that. I apologize if I go too long, but it's such a nice little story. Because when we were in India in December 2024 with the Buddhist Fellowship and some other people traveling around, and we came to Kushinara. And when we were in Kushinara, we were walking and looking at the various monuments and these kind of things, a little bit outside of the main complex. And then I decided, I actually don't really want to be with all these people. I apologize for those who were with me. I don't mean anything bad at all about that. I just mean it's nice to get a little bit of kind of solitude. Just be by yourself. And so I decided to walk out. And there was a river just there. So I thought, let me just walk along the bank of the river. And suddenly, I was like in the real Indian countryside. Yeah, there were just Indian people around working a bit in the fields, doing some stuff. I don't know what they were doing, putting some bricks together. Some were in the river fishing and all this kind of stuff. So I was walking along the bank of this river. And I walked for about 1 kilometer where I couldn't even see the people I was supposed to be with. I'm actually really glad I didn't get lost. Because in Singapore, you can get lost, no problem. You can always find your way. In India, no one understands a word of English. Yeah? This is the countryside in India. If I got lost there, that would be it. You would never see me again. That would be the final goodbye. But it was very easy. Yeah? It was kind of very obvious where you had to walk, so it wasn't very dangerous. But that would be cool, wouldn't it? You go to India, you just walk off, and that's it. You never see anyone again. Anyway, that's a thought for you right there. And so I walked about 1 kilometer, and then I went onto a bridge. There was a bridge going over this river. So I went onto the bridge. I looked up, and then on that bridge there was a name, giving a sign, the name of the river. And it said, Hiranyavati River. And I thought, wow, this is the same river as the Buddha describes in the suttas. The same name, 2,500 years later, still exists. Yeah? And this is kind of one of those amazing things about traveling to India. It's like walking into history. It's a feeling that you really are where the Buddha was. The Buddha comes alive. Just like I'm trying to humanize the Buddha now, if you are physically in the place where the Buddha was, that also humanizes the Buddha. It makes into a real person. And so this is the river that the Buddha crossed. Then, after crossing that river, he then lays down between the sal trees. This is the final place of rest for the Buddha. He lies down, and then a number of things happen while he's lying there. And eventually, it comes to the very end of the Buddha's life. And the very end of the Buddha's life, the Buddha, first of all, asks the community around him, are there any questions that you have? This is the last opportunity for questions. Yeah, right? So Q&A, really important. Yeah, the very last thing the Buddha does is kind of give Q&A to his disciples. This is important because it's an opportunity to interact, and interaction is very important. If it's just a one-sided giving Dhamma talks, it doesn't have the same impact as if you can interact a little bit. And so there is a Q&A. No one has a question. The Dhamma is complete. The Buddha has given everything. There's nothing more to be given. And then, after having given the opportunity to his community to ask questions, then come the last words of the Buddha. And remember, because these are the last words of the Buddha, they are particularly important. He wouldn't say these words unless they kind of summarize his entire teaching. The last words of the Buddha, 4 words, summarize everything that he has said during 45 years. What are those last words? They are Vaya Dhamma Sankara Apamadena sampadeta. Vaya Dhamma Sankhara means all phenomena, or phenomena have the nature to come to an end, nature to disintegrate. Because of that, that is the right view aspect of the world. Yeah, this is the right view that the Buddha has been trying to teach us all along. Everything is impermanent, everything is unreliable, everything must come to an end. That has a very profound consequence. The consequence is appamadena sampadeta, practice with heedfulness, practice with carefulness, carry on this path, practice in the right way, but in a careful, circumspect, intelligent way, using wise reflection as you go along. That is what it is about. Beautiful, powerful ending of the whole thing. And you can see we are going full circle. The Buddha, when he started out, when he began his career, he reflected on death. Reflecting on death and understanding that everything in the world is impermanent are two sides of the same coin. Because death is a very powerful moment of impermanence, a very powerful moment of unreliability and uncertainty. We're going to have to let go of everything, and we don't know what our future holds. Yeah, so like a coming full circle. The Buddha is saying at the very end, the summary of his teaching is very similar to what made him go forth in the first place. Two sides of the same coin, a similar way of understanding reality. And the consequence of that is appamadena sampadeta, practice with heedfulness. That is equivalent to the Buddha going forth after reflecting on death, going forth, practicing with everything that he had got to ensure he could find a solution to the problems of life. In the same way, we now, he's telling us exactly the same thing, contemplate impermanence. And when you see that impermanence, unreliability and uncertainty, then the consequences of that will be that you too practice with heedfulness. You will understand the urgency of the path. Now is the chance, now is the opportunity to do the right thing. Don't waste this opportunity here, because you will regret it later if you waste this opportunity. It's a very powerful moment. The Dhamma is still here. The Buddha is still around. The Buddha's teachings are real. The Buddha is a human being just like us. The Dhamma is here. Now is that opportunity here. So then, having given that teaching, the Buddha finally passes away. And the reaction of people when the Buddha passes away is very varied. Some people fall to the ground, they roll around on the ground, holding their tummies, wailing and lamenting. Too soon has the eye of the world passed away. Too soon has the eye of the world passed away. The Buddha is the eye of the world because he has seen, he has right view, he has understood the way things are. I like the way the Indians sorrow and lament, rolling back and forth on the ground, holding the stomach, It's kind of it's like a movie almost. It's kind of really nice. I like that. But then there were others, like the people who were enlightened or whatever, who said, why are you crying? There's nothing to cry here. All phenomena are impermanent. What do you expect? Of course, the Buddha has died. But then, on top of that, comes my own teacher, Ajahn Brahm. And what he said about it, he said that the best place in India is Kushinara, where the Buddha passed away, because that is the final letting go of suffering. The Buddha's body was getting older. He was having backaches. He had been poisoned with some food poisoning just before that. Now was his last opportunity to lay down the remainder of dukkha in his life, getting rid of it all, finally going into the final extinguishment, as we translate nibbana these days in the suttas. And for that reason, that is in many ways the happiest time of all. When you let go of everything, you leave everything behind, and that is the end of everything, the end of all suffering, the highest kind of happiness, the extinguishment of existence itself. So that is what we are celebrating today. And my main message to you is to try to go behind the facade of legend, the facade of mythology, the facade of distance, the seeming distance between us and the Buddha. Actually, there isn't really any real distance at all. The Buddha could have been here today. He could have been part of this. And if he were here, he would probably have been giving an amazing Dhamma talk to all of us. The Buddha is a Dhamma teacher. He is the most important teacher in the world. If you take your school teachers as important, the Buddha is far, far more important than that, because it gives you access to something far more significant. So remember that. Remember that when you're reading the suttas, you are actually listening to a Dhamma talk by the Buddha. The Buddha is teaching you. The Buddha is not teaching just the audience in front of him. The Buddha had a grand view of reality. He knew that his teaching was going to go on for the future, from one century to another one, from one culture to another one. And so he phrased it in terms that are universal and ever relevant for humanity. That is your teacher. And it is amazing, it is absolutely astonishing that we have somehow been able to find our way through this jungle of existence to the greatest spiritual teacher who ever lived. Isn't that amazing? If you understand that, it will give goosebumps on your skin. You feel, wow, electric, because actually it is really amazing that we somehow have found the way to this extraordinary teacher. And if you understand that, it will encourage you to practice the Dhamma in a more profound way, with more diligence, with more sense of urgency, with a greater appreciation that you're dealing here with the very meaning of life itself. So, that is a little Dhamma talk for you on the day of Vesak.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We do have quite a lot of questions, Ajahn Brahmāli.
Please.
I will have to pick a few. I've kind of consolidated them into 3 categories. One is about Buddha and Sangha. Another one is about life and death. And another category is on living with joy and wisdom in life. So I'll start off with the one related to Buddha and Sangha, since the topic is remembering Buddha for today. This first one, I think it is a question that shows a lot of wisdom and blessings and potentially more wisdom. So, first question. My mother always asks me to pray before I go to sleep. How useful is that? And is that true that Buddha will protect or bless me because I pray to Buddha?
Okay, it's very, very sweet, isn't it? Your mother asks you to pray to the Buddha. It depends what we do when we pray. And so what I recommend is make that prayer into a kind of meditation. And if you transform the prayer into meditation, you think of the Buddha, that the Buddha is this extraordinary spiritual master. You remember the qualities of the Buddha, and you feel peaceful because you have this person in your life who is there for you, who you can ask questions from. Because that's what we basically do. We ask questions from the Buddha when we read the suttas. And as long as you know that that person is available for you, that is an incredibly beneficial thing. And so the Buddha will protect you, not directly because the Buddha exists, but indirectly because you are practicing his teachings and you're living according to his message. So your mum is not entirely wrong, but it's more like finding the right way of prayer. Make it into a meditation, a contemplation of the qualities of the Buddha. Then you will be on the right track.
Thank you, Ajahn. The next question on living and death is, thank you, Ajahn, for your teachings. Hope you have a good stay in Singapore. How do we cultivate peace and acceptance instead of fear when we contemplate on death and lack of safety in our lives?
Okay, so what we have to do is we have to find a balance on the one hand between contemplating the realities of existence and the other hand finding the joy on the path. So if you feel that you get overwhelmed by fear and anxiety, then reduce the contemplation of the realities a little bit and instead do things that give rise to positive mind states. Be generous, be kind, do the right things for the people around you. And as you do that, it will lift your mind state up and you will feel much more fulfilled and happy and joyous as a human being. Once that is in place, then you can contemplate more about the realities of life. So the two things kind of go together. And when they are in nice balance and harmony, that is when you make the most progress on the spiritual path.
And in relation to rebirth, this question came, is a reincarnation or reborn true? If it's true, is it the truth that if we do bad or evil in the current life, we would be reborn as an animal or ugly creature in the next life?
The Buddha says that rebirth is true. And if the Buddha says it's true, then how could it not be true? Yeah, is the Buddha wrong? It's kind of, if the Buddha is wrong, well then he's not the Buddha anymore. Yeah, then he's just an ordinary human being. So if there really is a Buddha, then there must be rebirth, because those two things go together. If there is no Buddha, okay, then we can be unsure. So I say that the greatest reason to believe in rebirth is because the Buddha said so. Are we going to be reborn as an animal if you do bad things? Depends if you are really dodgy, yeah? If you are the kind of really bad person, if you go around stealing and killing a lot and lying all the time, then you might get reborn as an animal. But just because you make a few mistakes in life, and everyone makes some mistakes in life, does not mean you get reborn as an animal. Yeah, so that really depends. So if you make some mistakes, forgive yourself and start living better, and then you will get a good rebirth instead. And it's good to avoid being reborn as an animal. Yeah, animals have it really rough. It's hard to be an animal. Okay, you may think that being reborn as a pet in a nice family in Singapore is not so bad. Yeah, I'm sure the pets get pampered here in Singapore. But it's still not nice because you are deluded. Your mind is small. You don't understand what is going on. It's still really hard. You may think that it's, when you come to Perth and visit us in Perth, many of you have been to Perth to visit us down there, and you may think you see the kangaroos, oh, the kangaroos are so cute. Yeah, cutie. Actually, when you really know the kangaroos really well, like I do, not so cute, yeah? They are greedy and angry, and they fight with each other, and they are full of ticks and illnesses, and their life is really miserable, I can assure you. Don't become a kangaroo in your next life. Even worse is to become a mosquito, yeah? Absolutely don't become a mosquito. That's a really bad idea. And everyone is going to try to kind of kill you because of that. So, yeah, please. These are realities according to the Buddha. If you live your life well, there is a chance of going a long way in your spiritual practice. At the very least, you get a good rebirth. But if you make it even further, you get even higher prizes than that.
And the next question is, we hear a story about Buddha where he was just born and could walk 7 steps on lotus flowers and even talk. Then we were told that Buddha is just a normal human being. So isn't this contradictory, Ajahn?
Is it contradictory? Well, the 7 steps when he was reborn, I don't take that too seriously, to be honest, because, you have to know the suttas really well to know what to take seriously and what not to take seriously. And this particular idea that he took 7 steps is found one place in the Nikayas, in a sutta called the Acharya Bhuta Sutta, the wonderful and marvelous. It's about all the wonderful and marvelous events in the Buddha's life. And it so happens that a lot of that which is there is not very reliable. And we know that through textual study and comparison and these kind of things. So I wouldn't take that as too seriously. I would think of that more like the growing legend of the Buddha that started to grow after the Buddha passed away. And it's not to be taken too literally. It's important to be circumspect when we read the suttas. It is not as if this is an absolute truth, everything you read in there. It depends a bit on the situation, and you have to know how to read these things with a critical eye, an intelligent critical eye, not a stupid critical eye, but an intelligent critical eye. Then you can find the deeper truth. So the amazing thing of the Buddha is his wisdom. The amazing thing of the Buddha are not silly little things that he can walk 7 steps or he can fly through the air. That's just like entertainment, right? And we love entertainment. We think that these things are profound and interesting. But the real profundity of the Buddha is his wisdom, his understanding of the human condition. That is what is interesting. That is what matters. That is what we can use in our own life. The rest of it is actually quite meaningless. Okay.
And right now, we know the world is in a chaotic stage at the moment. Wars and conflicts are happening at many places and getting closer to here. What should we prepare or respond to this? Or how should we prepare and respond to this situation as a Buddhist?
So as Buddhists, there's 2 things we can do. The first thing we can do is to be a force for harmony in the world. The world needs harmony, and we as Buddhists, if we follow the way the Buddha taught us, we will be a force for harmony. And I think already when I look at our Buddhist society in Perth, when I look at how we work together with Buddhist societies around the world, after I'm leaving Singapore tomorrow morning already, that's a bit of a shame, isn't it? I only feel like I came yesterday. It's just like go so fast. And then I go back to Perth and I stay there for a few days, and then I go off to Europe and I do a similar thing in Europe like I've been doing here in Singapore. Travel to the UK, I travel to Poland, travel to Norway. And just before I came to Singapore, I was in Sri Lanka. And it's kind of nice. It's this beautiful feeling of this worldwide family, where we all kind of work together. And wherever I go, I usually find harmony. I find people working together. I find people with high-minded people who want to do the right thing. And so I know that as Buddhists, we can be part of the solution in the world, especially if we can get our own act together within our own Buddhist societies, then we can be an example for others to emulate and follow after us. So this is the first thing that we can do. The second thing that we can do is to understand that human societies have always been in conflict, that this is an impossible thing to have a society where there never is conflict, when there is never war. This is inherent in the human condition. Why? Because our defilements, because the real deep sense of self will by definition create conflict. It is impossible to avoid it entirely. You can have some societies that are better. You can strive towards improving society. And of course, we should try to do that. We should create as good societies as we possibly can. But we should remember that there is always going to be what you might call an irreducible element of conflict in all societies. And what that does, if you understand that, it propels you onto the spiritual path. You start to understand why it is so important not to take your refuge in that world, not to find all your happiness in the world, which is so unstable, because you will not. If you see something on TV or you read in the paper that the world is going wrong and you feel bad about it, that means you have taken refuge in that world. The fact that you feel bad about it means that you expected something else and you didn't get that because you looked upon the world in the wrong way. You took refuge in the wrong place. Take refuge in the Dhamma. We just talked about it just before, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, where the Buddha says, what do you expect? The world is uncertain. Everything must change. Everything must become otherwise. Okay, let me find the refuge within instead. Be a refuge unto yourself. Make the Dhamma your refuge. Be kind, be generous. This is how you build up that refuge. And you build it up even more, ultimately through meditation practice. Every little step on the Noble Eightfold Path is a step towards inner refuge, where the world, we're no longer so subordinate to the problems of the world, and we gain a certain degree of independence from that.
So Ajahn, you are such a busy monk. You wrote numerous papers and you got a doctorate and you're traveling all the time. And this brings up the next question. Maybe that's not a good question. The question is, why did you choose to be a monk?
destroying the microphone here. Why did I choose to become a monk? There is a booklet that is available which is called Why I Am a Buddhist Monk. Not why I became a Buddhist monk, but why I am a Buddhist monk. Two quite different things. And it's a kind of a long story. But when I was young, I thought that the reason I became a monk was because I am incredibly smart and wise. That's why I thought I became a monk, because that's what smart people do. They become monks. They become Buddhists. That's what I used to think. Actually, I'm not sure if I really thought that fully. But that was kind of, there's always a degree of conceit in whatever you do. You think you're doing the right thing. But I think the real reason why I'm a Buddhist monk, and this was kind of came to a shock to me as I gradually started to understand this, is because I've been a monastic in the past life. I've been a monastic, I don't know where, I've been a monastic probably in Asia somewhere. Maybe I was a nun, And so I think that's the reason, because otherwise I can't really explain how it happened. I grew up in a society and a family, there was no Buddhism in sight. I never heard about Buddhism, nothing like that. And somehow I was drawn towards the idea of spiritual practice, of solitude, and all of these things. It kind of came quite natural to me. And so I think the only way I can really understand this is because I probably was a monastic in the past life. And in a way, it's a beautiful thought to me, because if I was a monastic, it would have been in Asia, I don't know, Sri Lanka, Thailand, China, I have no idea, somewhere. And then, of course, straight away, it means that I'm Sri Lankan is just underneath, just within, right? It's just maybe one or a few lifetimes ago. I was kind of part of an Asian culture instead. And there's something very beautiful about that, when you see yourself as someone who comes from a different culture. And when you look at the people around you, you start seeing yourself in those people. Because when the moment I did that, it took away so many of the barriers that we often have between each other. We create all these artificial and stupid barriers because we belong to different cultures, different whatever it is, all these differences between us. But actually, they're just an illusion. There's nothing really there. You can go from one culture to the next one, from one life to the next one, and suddenly you're part of humanity instead of being part of a subset of that humanity. It's a very powerful insight. Within you, all people exist within you. All genders, poor and rich, educated, uneducated, intelligent, stupid, all of those are within you, waiting to come out, given the right conditions. And once you see yourself in that way, you can see another person, whoever they are, and you can recognize yourself in that person. And it takes away some of the barriers. So this is kind of one of the great benefits of thinking like that. And so I think I was a monastic in the past life, and the moment I realized that, or the moment I thought that, I thought, well, if I was a monastic in the past life, it means that the reason why I'm a monk now is because of habit. Good habit, right? It's a good habit. You agreed? Yeah, it's a good habit. But still, it's a habit. I'm just doing it because of habit. That kind of shocked me a little bit when I realized that. I thought I was really smart. I thought I was doing all the right kind of moves or whatever. Actually, it's because of habit. And that scared me, because the moment you realize you're doing something because of habit, it's a bit like a trap. Because habits are traps. We do it without thinking. We just do it because it happens to be that way. We're conditioned in a certain way. And because I felt maybe I am trapped, that is one of the reasons that led me to really inquire into the suttas, trying to understand the word of the Buddha properly. What is the word of the Buddha? Where do we find it? And once I find it, well, then look for the teachings. How do we understand them? And then I realized, actually, it's not just a habit. I really believe in this stuff. This really makes sense. I have confidence. And so that inquiry into my background, or who I may have been in the past, led me to also much greater confidence in the Dhamma at the same time. And that was one of the great benefits of that. And so the reason I am a Buddhist monk is not because I'm very smart, not because I'm very wise, not because I'm anything at all. It's because I was one in the past life. That is the answer. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but that's the reality.
Well, we're coming close to the end, but we have picked one last question. And this one is to really help us all in our practice, as this is Vesak as well. So, Ajahn, you taught spiritual happiness is more fulfilling than worldly happiness, which will leave us dissatisfied. But spiritual happiness, for example, meditation, takes time for us to be happy if we meditate properly. So how do we overcome and practice that?
It doesn't take time. This is one of those really interesting things. It is immediate. And let me tell you a little story from the suttas. I love this little story. This is the story I tell on retreats all the time. And this is a story of a monk called Samidhi at the time of the Buddha. And Samidhi was a young man, and according to the story, he had just been bathing in the river or a lake or whatever. And after coming out, he was kind of just wearing one robe, and he was drying himself. And as he was standing there, kind of wearing one robe and drying himself, a devata came, a deva, a god came down to visit him. And this was obviously a female god. There's a female god and the young monk. You can see the tension here, right? This is kind of the world for you. It's kind of tension between these things. And so this stunning devata comes down, and she says to this monk, she says, "You are just young. Yeah, you are in the prime of life. Why are you wasting your time being a monk? Searching for some kind of future happiness that you have no idea about, when you can enjoy yourself right now with sensual pleasures." This is Mara, right? This is Mara shouting in your ear and really trying to get you out of the robes. It's kind of very interesting. But this monk was very smart. He didn't buy into what this devata was saying, just like this question now, right? You can enjoy yourself right now, so what about this future meditation or whatever? He said, no, it's actually the other way around. It is the worldly pleasures that are always about the future, and the pleasure of the Dhamma is available right now. That's what he answers. So why is that? And the answer is that the worldly pleasures are always about craving. They're always about the future. They're always about moving on to something else. You have a kind of a nice meal, and then you feel satisfied for a while, you feel a bit drowsy afterwards, and soon enough you get hungry again. It's always about moving on to something else. While you're eating one spoon, you're already filling up your next spoon, with the next one. The craving is there while you are enjoying the food. And this is the problem with the worldly life. It never really reaches satisfaction. You're never satisfied. You're always moving on into the future. Never coming to the present fully. But if you practice the spiritual life, and it doesn't have to be meditation, it can be simple things like just being kind. If you are very kind to someone and you say, "I really appreciate you as a friend," what a wonderful thing that I have you as a kalyana mitta, as a spiritual friend. Thank you for being there for us. Thank you for being part of the BF. I've never told you before, but actually, I really appreciate you. The moment you say that, sincerely, coming from your heart, meaning it, that brings with it a sense of happiness and contentment. And that happiness and contentment has no craving related to it. It's a pure, present happiness that comes here and now. So this is the difference between the worldly happiness and the spiritual happiness. It doesn't have to be meditation. It can be just simple acts like kindness and generosity. And if you look at the kind of happiness that is there, it is far more profound, far more peaceful, far more meaningful, far more immediate than the happinesses of the world. And that is the difference and why it works. Okay.
Thank you, Ajahn. Let's say 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.